Hello, AP Worlders. We are back with the last lecture of the early modern era. It's cultural transformation in religion and science. Some of this is going to be a little bit of review from previous lectures, but it's all good. But the early modern era is going to give birth to two intersecting cultural trends. First was the spread of Christianity to foreign continents, and second was modern scientific outlook, which is going to challenge Christianity. Science is going to become almost a new religion, and it's going to achieve worldwide acceptance that's going to exceed Christianity or any other religion. Christianity, despite the fact that Christianity began in the Middle East and in its early years spread to Asia, by the start of the early modern era, Christianity was largely limited to Europe. There were small kingdoms in Egypt, Ethiopia, southern India, and Central Asia, but it was mostly limited to Europe for Christianity. Those other places were very small. Christianity was also highly divided at the beginning of this era, not only from the Catholics and Eastern Orthodox split that occurred with the fall of Rome in the start of the Byzantine Empire, but also from the Reformation that's going to begin in the early parts of the early modern era. The Catholics did grow through a counter-Reformation. The Catholics clarified and reaffirmed their unique doctrines and practices, and they corrected the abuses and corruption that had started the Protestant movement in the first place. Although the Reformation was a religious movement, it encouraged a skeptical attitude towards authority and tradition. This would open the door for all kinds of new intellectual life in Europe. So when Christianity spread around the world during exploration, it was more fragmented, but it was also renewed and revitalized. Christianity motivated European political and economic expansion, and it also benefited from it. Here's a look at just a breakdown that we looked at in class before of the early Christian church, then became the Roman Catholic Church, and then it splits with the Byzantine Empire, right? Eastern Orthodox, and there Russia gets their own Orthodox. You got the Greek Orthodox, all right, and then we get the split here. When we get the Reformation, right? We get Reformed churches, right? We get Lutheran from Luther, all right. You get the Church of England, all right. But you can see all the different groups that are going to form. All right, so like I said, Christianity motivated European political and economic expansion, and it also is going to benefit from it. Missionaries attempted to actively spread the Christian message beyond Europe into Africa, Asia, and the New World. Russian missionaries also are going to expand Christianity into Siberia. Missionaries had their greatest success in the Philippines and in the Spanish American colonies. The conquest of the natives, specifically the Inca Aztecs, led the Europeans to see this as a demonstration of the power of the Christian God. And the natives generally agreed that the power of God must be strong as to why the Europeans were able to defeat them. And some natives would then convert to Christianity. Europeans would claim an exclusive religious truth, and they sought utter destruction of local gods and everything associated with them to the natives who did not choose to convert. They would destroy their idols and monuments, and at times it would even go into a resistance from the natives. But these resistances were usually quickly smashed by the Europeans. Another attempt was made to blend Christianity with a lot of local religious and traditions amongst the Native Americans. An example of that would be like voodoo in Haiti. The Chinese, their encounter with Christianity was very different from the Native Americans in Spain's New World for a couple of reasons. One, the political context. The Native Americans encountered Christianity when their political system and way of life was completely disrupted. China, on the other hand, encountered Christianity while their powerful and prosperous Ming and Qing dynasties were in force. Second, in China, missionaries used a different tactic they had to get permission to operate there. In Spain, they wanted to convert the masses. In China, they wanted to convert the elites, and then they hoped it would then spread to the masses if the elites would convert. Following the lead of the famous missionary in China, Matteo Ricci, Matteo, last name Ricci, they learned Chinese, and they even dressed like Chinese scholars. They tried to point out parallels between Confucianism and Christianity. Third, nothing close to mass conversion to Christianity took place in China. Only a modest number of Chinese would convert to Christianity. Missionaries did find favor for a time in the Chinese imperial court with their math, astronomy, technology, and map-making skills. But ultimately, the missionaries offered little that the Chinese wanted. And eventually the Pope tried to claim authority over the Chinese Christians and declared they couldn't blend Confucian thoughts with Christianity. This would outrage the Chinese emperor and represented a major turning point in Christianity in China. Many missionaries were expelled from China, similar to how the Japanese expelled the Christian missionaries after they unified Japan, making use of the Christian weapons. All right, so remember at first Japan also allowed the missionaries in. And then, because they were in feudalism, and then once they gained control, they kicked out the Christian missionaries. All right. The Chinese also kicked out the missionaries because they saw how the Christians came to rule the Philippines. And they also didn't like how the Christian warships were disrupting things in the Indian Ocean. All right, but here's a look at Christian missionaries who dressed in traditional Chinese clothes trying to convert people in China. All right, then next we look at missionaries trying to convert the Africans, right, with the African slave trade. And Christians also found a home with the slaves and the Africanized version of Christianity that's going to emerge in the New World. All right, and an example of this blending would be voodoo in Haiti. So forget earlier when I said voodoo in Haiti. That was the Native Americans. I'm sorry, that was the Africans. But it combined various forms of West African tradition and incorporated Christian beliefs and practices into mixing with their own. And so here's a look, especially the children converting the Africans to Christianity. All right, in China, they're going to fight off a wide spread of Christianity, but Confucianism also went through a change. All right, we talked about this a little bit during the last era with this Neo-Confucianism, all right, which was the Confucianism would be enriched with insights of Buddhism and Taoism, all right, with this Neo-Confucianism. All right, and then in India, over here, this sign is for Sikhism, all right, but in India, Hinduism is going to be reigning supreme until now. Remember, the Mughal dynasty is going to rule, and they were a Muslim dynasty. But remember, the Mughal ruler Akbar, he did attempt to combine elements of Islam and Hinduism. And Sikhism is going to emerge, which was an attempt to blend Islam and Hinduism. All right, but Sikhism is going to be unique in the fact that they're going to develop their own sacred texts and a central place of worship and a central place to pilgrimage to, different than Mecca. All right, then last, science. The scientific revolution. We kind of already talked about what the scientific revolution was, but why did the scientific revolution happen in Europe? Islam at the time had the most advanced science in the world. China had technological accomplishments and economic growth that were unmatched. And Europe's universities, unmatched. So there's a couple of reasons, 4 reasons why it happened in Europe. First, Europe universities were autonomous. They were free from the church and state. All right, in both China and Islam, their universities were regulated. In China, it was regulated more by the state, and in Islam, their universities were ruled more by regulated more by the church. Second, in Europe, they began to value individualism, right, with the Renaissance and that idea of individuals. Third, Europe, through exploration, found themselves at the center of a massive new exchange of information, as they became aware of lands, people, plants, animals, societies, and religions from all around the world. And this new wave of knowledge would lead to new ways of thinking. And fourth, the Reformation contributed to the culture of challenging authority. So all these are going to lead to the Reformation taking place. Or not the Reformation, sorry, the Scientific Revolution. A new understanding of the physical universe is going to emerge because of this scientific revolution. The idea of using human reason by observation and experiment. And through dissections of the human body was no longer a mystery. Much of this went on at the opposition of the Catholic Church. After this was understood that human reason could discover the laws that govern the universe, people believed that it could also uncover ways in which humankind might govern itself more effectively. And that movement is going to be the Enlightenment, where they try to find out ways to govern themselves more efficiently. There was some mixing of Enlightenment ideas with Christianity, right? Two religious groups that are going to start mixing Enlightenment ideas with Christianity. The first are going to be the Methodists, and they're going to emphasize studying the Bible, confessing sins, and resistance to worldly pleasures. And then third is the Quakers, emphasizing tolerance, absence of hierarchy. All right, and then remember, the Enlightenment is kind of going to really lead us into our next time period, which is the Revolutions era, because that's when we're going to get a lot of political revolutions where people are going to demand more rights. All right, like the French Revolution, the American Revolution, right? Those are all going to have Enlightenment ideas kind of fueling their revolutions. All right, so that's the last lecture for the early modern era. See you in class.